Hey there, this is Layla Benitez James with Tell Poetry. I'm here with Hannah Rousselot. She is a queer French American poet, writer, and educator. Her work revolves around her experiences with mental illness, love, loss, and her connection to the world. Her poetry has appeared in many publications, including Parentheses Magazine, the McNeese Review, the Blue Nib, the Broadkill Review, and she has published two full-length poetry collections, Fragments of You out with Kelsey Press, and Ocean Currents, which is forthcoming from Finishing Line Press. Hannah, thank you so much for joining Tell Poetry today. And
Thank you so much for having me.
yeah, and huge thanks for letting me get a sneak peek of Ocean Currents. I saw that the pre-order ships soon in June, and I was going to ask you if you had your physical copy yet, which I see behind you.
So I actually don't have a physical copy, but what I did do, hot tip, is I printed out the cover and then I laminated it, just so that there's a visual for when I do readings. And it helps give a little bit of an idea of what the book will look like. That way people don't have to necessarily like imagine it. And also whenever I see people doing readings and I want to get their books down, it's so much more helpful if they have it in the background because then I have time to like write it all down and it's just a lot easier.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. And the only thing I'll mention though is that online it looks like the Ocean Currents script is pink, and there's like these little pink like lines in the
Mhm.
waves. It's a really beautiful design. I
Yeah.
love it.
So I actually took that photo while I was
Oh
visiting
wow.
my grandparents in France. And it was right about as like the sun was setting. And I saw this pink on the waves and it was just like, it just astounded me. And so I snapped a photo and then the ocean has always been really, really important to me. It's just something that has really lived within me for like my whole life. And so when I wrote Ocean Currents and I was looking through my photos, I was like, this is the one. This is the one I want to use.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Yeah, I was like, when I saw it, it's such a soft cover and that pink is so amazing, but I wouldn't necessarily notice the pink in the waves except that it's pulled out in the font. And not everyone can like have that relationship with their cover either. Sometimes you just get the publisher
You
gives you
get what you
something.
get.
Yeah, you get what you
Yeah.
get. Oh God, it's so perfect. And so I highly recommend that everyone gets it or pre-order it. It's going to be out just under a month. But I loved reading your collections together in the same day
Mhm.
because they're
Mhm.
just so incredibly different. But there were these threads that kept coming through. I mean, like the ocean is a huge one that you just mentioned. But even like salt and like you had mentioned like the sweat. And I was
Mhm.
wondering like how was the process like composing those poems and ordering them, and like how much time was between those collections?
Oh, well, that's interesting. So Fragments of You really was kind of pulled out of me, right? It's about the my first love and her death. And it was for a very long time after she died, I couldn't write at all. And I've always been able to write, and I just couldn't do it. Um, and then when I started writing, it just kind of all poured out of me. All of these feelings and thoughts and regrets and grief and all of that. And I'm a very tactile person, and I also like the feeling of like these bodily functions that we have, like sweat and tears. All of these things have a taste of salt to them, just like the ocean. And
Right.
so there's this idea of like everything is connected, right? I mean, we are all
Right.
connected to be that person. And so when I was writing Fragments of You, I had like some of the bits of Ocean Currents as well, but I wasn't able to focus on them until Fragments of You was out because I needed I needed her to live that way. And I still write many Emma poems, like all the time. But once I was able to really like share her with the world, that's when I was able to kind of focus a little bit more inward and think about, well, what has it been like to live with my type of brain? Everyone has their own type of brain, but my brain can be difficult sometimes. And what are the things that ground me? And often the things that ground me are the physical sensations of like swimming. And then also like this is kind of embarrassing, but when I was a kid and I was sad, I would write in my journal and I would make sure that my tears touched the pages. That way I would know I had been like crying. And I feel like that's a lot of poetry for me, is I want to make sure that my tears are like on the page, you know?
Poet. That is so, yeah, that is just like classic, classic poet. But it makes so much sense that there was a little bit of overlap between the collections as well, like that some of the poems were composed because they really like they feel close, those poems.
Mm, hmm. Yeah, and I think that's kind of how it is because so there's a poet and I don't know their name who talked about a boneyard, and it's kind of like where you put all of your like lines and like half finished poems and all that. And so whenever I'm really struggling with writing a new poem, I go through that boneyard, and that's where I find like, oh, okay, this poem that I wrote like 3 years ago, that there's maybe like a line that I can take from this that I can then build into something new. And that's a lot of what happened with Ocean Currents, but some of them are also like, especially the beginning poems, because the beginning poems are very like in the midst of like struggling and, these themes of all of the themes, right? Like self-harm, like suicide, all of those
Yeah.
things are at the beginning. And then at the end, it kind of takes a little bit more of a healing prospect, and kind of learning to live with what you have and finding coping strategies for these things, right?
Mhm.
Because for a while, it kind of feels like you are like in that current, like you're stuck, you're being pulled and pulled and pulled. And you kind of learn how to create your own, your own like lighthouse, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, is the Dead Sea is the lowest place of the earth. Is that
Mhm.
at the end of that collection?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the last one. And it's just about like I went to the Dead Sea, actually. I lived in Jerusalem for 3 months during college. And there was something about it, just the fact that it's the lowest place on earth, but it's also the only place that you can float on the ocean,
Yeah.
just like really spoke to me because it's this idea of like, even if you are at the depths of like whatever sea level or the depths of yourself, like there's still an ability to float. There's still an ability to stay on top of whatever is happening to you and to have like a certain level of like wonder, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, that just that when you were saying that, the line contradictions are what keep us breathing, like that just like came like,
Mhm.
yes, yeah, that is it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so can you talk about your process of like ordering your books just like on a physical level? Are you somebody who like prints everything out and has to paste it to the wall? How did that look for you with the two books? And was it different or was it like you have your routine that you go to?
Yeah, I definitely have a routine. It needs to be printed out. I can't, there's no other way to do it. So I print them all out and then I organize them by like tone and feeling. So I put like them in different sections. And then I think about how they interweave. I think a lot about length because you don't really want to read like a super lengthy poem and then another really lengthy poem.
Right.
And I think too about like when I organize them by tone, I don't even necessarily keep them in those organized spaces because then like every poem has its main tone and then kind of like its undertone.
Yeah.
And so it's about like, okay, how do I weave these together? Because you want there to be a narrative for sure, but you also don't want it to feel like three different collections. So there's a way of weaving it so that like there's a little bit of the last tone in the beginning and a little bit of the middle tone throughout, and just so that like when I think about, fragments of you, it's even split into sections and it's very much like within the grief and then the quasi healing, however much you can heal from grief. And
Yeah.
then with Ocean Currents, it's the same thing, right? It's like the stuck in the middle, stuck in it, and then the slow coming to like some level of healing, and I kind of,
Yeah.
healing is such an interesting word because it's not like you can ever be, it's not like it'll ever close up, like there's always going to be a scar and it'll reopen at times, but that's kind of the best way to describe it.
Yeah. And then in terms of images, so like when you were putting together Ocean Currents, like did you have fragments of you in mind or were you trying to like go with the blank slate?
Yeah, I kind of just went with a blank slate. And I mean, your work stays with you, right? Like, I'm sure that to some degree, like, there was this thing in the back of my mind, but for, each of my collections, and I just finished a micro chapbook, I really do think about like what is happening in this collection, like what am I trying to say with these particular poems.
Mm.
And I think that's also why they feel so different, is because like they are, to some degree, they're different parts of me.
Mhm.
And so like I really want my next collection, we'll see if it works out, I really want my next full-length collection to be about love. And so that has been a really interesting thing, because I don't write that much about love, and I want to kind of figure out a way to translate a lot of the love that I've received and the love that I've given, both to myself and others. So there's these different themes that go throughout all of the works.
Mm. Well, yeah, tell us a bit more about that micro collection. I heard in your last podcast, you said that you like were doing poetry month, you were doing it, and like you
Yes.
wrote a poem a day, which like congratulations. That's a huge
Thank you. Thank
like
you. Yes, I did. I did. And it's interesting too, because like I wrote a poem for each day, but there were some days that I skipped, and then I wrote two poems the next day.
okay, good.
Because
Yeah.
I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this today. So I would write two poems the next day. Yeah, and so my micro chapbook, which I'm trying to get published, it's not out anywhere right now, but it's called Appetite, and it's about my eating disorder. And I'm really so when I was in college, I was like very, very much in the midst of it. And, I went to like residential treatment and all of that. And now my recovery is more based on like recovering, right? Like looking at the underlying themes of why these things happen, and like why they happen to me, but also why they happen in general. And
Mm.
so when I was doing National Poetry Month, these were the poems that were coming out of me. I guess I was just like ready to process this and to think about like, why is this something that I have clinged on to for so, so long? Like, why is this something that I felt necessary and that I felt was useful to me for a certain period of time, right? Because that's a big thing that you think about when it comes to these like illnesses, is like, well, this must have served me at some point. So like, what did it serve? Why did it serve that? And why do I no longer need it? Like, what do I have that will serve me in the same way instead? Um, yeah, so that's kind of what we'll see
Mm. I
if
love
anyone
that
picks it up.
title.
But that's,
Yeah,
yes,
like
yeah,
appetite. Yeah, that is a great
yeah,
title. So those are
yeah,
new poems, like really fresh.
yeah, like within the last month, fresh, within April, fresh. Yes,
Mm.
yes. Yeah, and it's interesting because some of them came out, I don't know like how other poets do it, but sometimes for me, like some poems come out like fully formed. Like they just like come out onto the page and that's that. And
Yeah.
then other poems, I'm like, okay, I really have to like rework this one or figure this out. And so that one had a bit of both.
Hmm, nice. And then, I mean, I want to ask you a little bit more about the podcast you're building and like the new community. And then, specifically in one of your episodes, I was really interested in the SB Marrow episode. You were
Mm-hmm.
talking about how the natural world is like a place of healing and exploration of the psyche. And in so many of your poems, I felt that you were really like shining a spotlight. I mean, it's almost like the body is a landscape and you're like traveling into that landscape. I'm thinking about like Vagrants,
Mm-hmm.
um, where you say, deep in the ventricles of my heart, there is a pool of light illuminating a bus stop where I sit waiting. And it was like that like zooming in and out was so beautiful. But I just feel like the natural world also really lends itself to that. So could you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about how that influences your poems?
Yeah. Well, like I said before, like, and this isn't an original belief, but I do think that we are like all connected. Like a part of me, not a part of me. I believe that like what we're basically like an organism, kind of like how our cells are us. We are the cells of something bigger. Um, and for me, like, in order to understand myself, I often have to look outside and kind of see like what is happening within the world that reflects what's going on within me. Because that's just easier sometimes to like look at bigger things than like to look, there's a connection and a feeling that is unparalleled than when you see yourself reflected in the natural world, right? Like when
Hmm.
you're in the middle of a thunderstorm and you can hear that thunder and it shakes your bones. It's like a manifestation of your feelings that is like
Yeah.
experienced by everyone. Um, And that's what I see when I look at the natural world. And it also, you know, I think humans got a little too smart. And I think that, you know, I think that we lose a lot of our connection with the world because we just, you know, we're caught in like capitalism and all of these things that make it so it's impossible for us to really focus on anything but survival, which is funny because you think about the natural world and you think, oh, survival of the fittest and all that, but really now we're in a different kind of survival and it's not even as tangible, to be honest. But yeah, when I think of myself, I think of the world, and you know, you can feel so isolated when you struggle with mental illness. It can feel like you're the only one who feels this way, and you know, you're the only one. It's almost like a complex. Like you're the only one who feels this way. You're the
Yeah,
singular human who has
totally.
experienced this. And part of healing is to let go of that and to let go of that superiority and be like, no, you're just a human and these things happen to many people and it's just part of life. And the natural world reminds me of that,
Yeah,
you
nice.
know?
That also really makes sense, like with the zooming in and out, like that kind of God
Mhm.
complex. Like you're
Mhm.
giant and then you're tiny. When you're looking at
Yes.
the natural world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, well, tell me more about the podcast because it's like it's in
Mhm.
the still in the beginning stages, still in the first year, I
Mhm.
think.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and it's so wonderful. Like I kind of want to know where, like, how did it come about? Just like, you're wanting to build poetry community. And then where I really love the format. And so I wanted to hear like a bit how you came um, to the format. And yeah, I listened to the
Mhm.
latest episode with Karen Poppy, and it's like, it's
Yeah.
just really lovely. Like the passion of poetry, it's just like so present in your voice. It's lovely.
I do love poetry. Um, yeah. So, well, you know, for a long time, I've been writing reviews on my website of poetry books. And I'd been doing that for probably almost a year, maybe longer now. And I really enjoyed like engaging with the poems in that way. But there's something, so just for those who don't know, like basically it's I have a author, a poet, send me their favorite poem from their collection, and then I pick a favorite poem and I read them, and I tell the readers what the author said about it. And that to me is like the meat of it, because you know, when you read a poem, you can get so much out of it. But what's really cool too is to hear what the author wanted you to get out of it.
Yeah.
And like that connection between, like, well, the author was thinking, you know, XYZ, and then, oh, that makes so much sense based on what I received from it. And being able to talk about those things is really, really cool. Like to me, that's such a privilege to hear what authors think about their work. And then like being able to share poetry with people and being able to share what I think about it and what connected to me is really important. And then I close it out with a poem of my own, which I gotta say, I love reading my poetry. I really do. Like I love performing. I love going to open mics. It's something that I really enjoy. And you know, when I think back to high school and college, like talking about poetry and just books in general, but it was always something that was so personal and important to me. And being able to have that discussion, even if it's kind of one-sided because it's just me talking,
Hmm.
but there is also the words of the poet there because
Yeah.
I have them like send me a little write-up about their poems. And so being kind of in discussion with that, it just, I don't know, honestly, it brings me joy. And I think I just needed a little bit of joy in the pandemic. I needed something,
Yeah.
and this is how I did it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing to come out of that. And were there other podcasts that you were inspired by, or do you have like, are you just thinking it's going to evolve organically, or do you have like, where do you see the podcast in 5 years?
So I listen a lot to podcasts, but actually none like my own.
No,
I
that's
listen
okay.
to a lot
Yeah.
of like fiction podcasts. So
Mhm.
like I listen to a lot of story podcasts, especially sci-fi, where it's kind of like a radio play almost.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, I haven't really thought about the future of poetry aloud. I think I've just kind of thought, you know, I'm just going to do it and see where it goes. And so far I have a pretty long list of people who want to be featured. And so like I have a bit of material for a while, and I think I'm just gonna I think at the beginning I was very focused on like it has to be out by this specific time, it has to be doing XYZ, all this sort of stuff. And as I said before, it was really a project born out of joy. And so I kind of had to take a step back and be like, you know what? Like it'll come out when it comes out. Let's try and make it once a month at least,
Yeah.
and make it really be like a a a passion of joy, a project of joy.
Mm.
Because like otherwise, what's the point? Like I'm doing it to have fun and to engage with something that is so incredibly important to me. So
Yeah. No, it
yeah.
sounds like it. Like I really, yeah, the passion is like very there in your voice. And yeah, I'm excited to hear the next one, but no pressure on on when you want to release it. Um, well, so finally, we'd love to hear about some of your favorite books, and maybe
Mhm.
hear about poets who people don't talk about enough, or just really hear who you're reading, like whose poetry is giving you life just now.
Yeah, so I have three here. One I'm in the middle of reading, and I just like, it's so good. So it's called Book of Lullabies by Megan Leonard,
Oh, wow.
and I'm halfway. I'm like not half. I'm reading it right now, and it is like absolutely incredible. It's one of those books where you read the images and you're like, I never thought of it that way, but that's exactly what it's like. I love it when I read poetry like that.
Yeah, the design is beautiful. You hold it up again, it's like really, it's
Yes.
long. Yes.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
And like if you look at the poems themselves, oh goodness, you can't.
Whoa. No, I could, yeah, we can see that
Yes, there
the
you go.
lines are
You can
really,
see,
really
uh-huh.
long. Oh, that's
And then there are
gorgeous.
some that are like kind of prose-ish
Mhm.
as well.
Oh, that's so
Um,
cool. I love stuff that's like going out of the lines of the normal page. I just want to
mhm,
experiment more with
mhm.
that.
Yeah, and so I really, really love this so far. I can't wait to finish it. I honestly recommend it to many people out there. And then the other two I've reviewed on my website. One is Knockoff Monarch by Crystal Stone. And I really like this one because, well, again, like there is also that element of like concrete poetry,
Oh, yeah.
which just always speaks to me. I love it when poets do things like outside. But for me as well, this one spoke to me because I just saw myself in it, honestly. This idea of metamorphosis, because it starts out with the egg and it goes all the way to the painted lady, which is the knockoff monarch.
Oh, yeah.
And this idea too of like being a knockoff, like being not exactly the way that you're supposed to be, and these things that were supposed to happen to you that weren't. And it's again like the contradictions, the paradoxes that are in our world. There's it starts with childhood, it goes all the way to adults, and there's kind of this dream. I'm looking through my notes right now, kind of like this dream state of what could have been and what it ended up being and how to live with that. I thought that was very cool. Oh, here's like another one that's kind of concrete as well.
Oh, that's lovely.
And then the next one is Glorious Veils of Diane by Rainey Owett. And this book, I have never read a poetry book like this before. Like I reviewed it on my website, and they just did such an incredible job. It's like it's so interesting because it's all about this character Diane, and it's about how other people perceive her and how she perceives herself, but it also jumps through time. And so it starts with the premise. On January 14th, 1999, Diane disappeared. And then it jumps through time. So there's times when Diane is there and times when Diane isn't there. And all of the poems are titled either Blood or Blood Diary. And then they have like different names behind them, and they all have dates on them. And I read this, and I have, as I said, like I've never read a collection like this before.
Mhm.
And it's one of those collections that just like kind of burrows into you, like you read it once and you're like, whoa. And then you read it again, and it just kind of like it gets to the basement of your mind, right? Like to this part of your mind that just you don't necessarily think about up here, but is still so connected to you. So I would really recommend this. It's really awesome. And those are the three that I have right now. Again, like I review a lot on my website, so readers can feel free to take a look and see what I've reviewed there. I have a bunch coming up as well. But what really speaks to me about like other collections is kind of, yeah, these images that I never would have thought of, but kind of like pierce to the heart of it. And then collections I can learn from. And I feel like all of these collections have something I can learn from.
Amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today, and
Of
I hope I
course.
can talk with you soon and read your new collection very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Layla. Thank you.